Hello, and welcome. Welcome to the second International Plant Breeding Seminar Series organized by NC State. Please tell us in the chat where you're joining from, and also post your questions. Post your questions in the Q&A. They are communicated that I have an echo, but I'm just using my microphone. Okay. Let's see. Hugo, you want to mute yourself for a minute? Maybe that's the echo coming from. Okay, thank you. Today we have Dr. Hugo Campos from the International Potato Center presenting a talk on bringing an innovation perspective, to ag research and plant breeding. Hugo is the director of research at SIP, and previously he served both at former Monsanto and former Pioneer, and also he worked in sugarcane. So he has worked in most of his time in Latin America, Brazil, Peru, and Chile. He did his graduate studies at John Innes Center in the UK and has an MBA in Chile. He grew up between Chile and Argentina, and he's particularly keen on running marathons and half marathons. So Hugo, it's a pleasure to have you, and we look forward to your presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and let you present.
Are you able to see my screen?
Final thoughts?
Yeah, so, well, you asked me for a very short presentation, so it's done already. How about now?
Yes,
okay?
You're good.
Okay, so, hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm really excited to be here with all of you, and even happier that NCSU, Carlos, and the team, they came up with this wonderful idea. So, essentially, what I'm going to be talking with you about today is not going to be about purely plant breeding, even though I have been working and practicing plant breeding over many years in several companies, in several countries, and in different crops. I'm going to share with you a slightly different perspective that I believe that it's only enhanced the perspective and the view of plant breeders. So I'm going to be talking about innovation. And by and large, I learned about innovation and about practicing innovation while working in industry, mostly in the former Monsanto and the former Pioneer. And by the way, don't tell my boss, but it looks like every single company I work for, it had changed names. So, but other than in the US, I also worked for several years in Brazil in a sugarcane breeding program. So I have been really fortunate just to build experience across many different crops and many different markets. So I'd like to start by thanking the organization that enabled me to be here with you today. My work at SIP, where I serve as a director of research, is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by USAID, by the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, and also by our CEAR research program called RTV. And in this presentation, I won't really have enough time to go into details into the fascinating topic of innovation, but you will be able just to get more insights about innovation from this wonderful book. I really recommend you to read it. And if you're interested about innovation within agriculture, I published this book about 4 months ago. and sent to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is an open access book. So actually, by using that link, you can download the whole book by free. I encourage you to do so. And please share it with others. The only reason why we publish this book as an open access book is so that it can be made available to as many people as possible. So I will write down the link on the chat in a few minutes. The book so far it has been very successful. It was published about 4 months ago, and it's already has been downloaded nearly 50,000 times. So it looks like it really resonates with its customers. So I hope that by having a look at Matt Riley's book and mine, you will be able just to learn more about innovation. So this is the agenda for today. Let me start by making a defense of the word business, that it creates issues among scientists. Then I will share my views on why I believe that innovation is actually very different from R&D. Also, whether innovation, it only makes sense in a profit-seeking organization, in other words, in a company. Then I will share with you what I believe that it is one of the most critical concepts that we really need to understand very well if we aim to be successful in innovation. And then I will talk about a myth, the power of failure. Failure is critical, and if we do it right. So, and again, in science, we don't really like to talk about failure. That's why I'm bringing the issue. So let me start spending a couple of minutes on the word business. I mean, for starters, business is not only about the ruthless quest for profits. Some people use the business from that perspective. However, business has nothing to do only with profit seeking. Also, it's not about greediness, okay? And I have seen over many years that many brilliant scientists, they really have issues with the word business. And I believe that we really need to understand the meaning of the word and how we can do business even while running a scientific career. Let's start with the basic, with the etymology of the word. Actually, the word business is come from a very old English word, which is there. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce it properly, but its meaning is about attending to, be concerned about, be diligent. So in other words, business, and again, this is my own view, it is by and large, it's about moving towards a goal, okay? It's about to be determined about serious action. It is about taking action, doing things. So from my perspective, I see a lot of positive meaning associated with this word. And I'd like to invite you at least to consider this perspective of the business of the word business, because in many cases there are many confusions, and there's many people that believe that business and scientists, they're not compatible to each other. I have been able just to work on business and in R&D for over 20 years now, and I believe that they are fully compatible. Therefore, if you are a scientist, don't forget this, you are running a business, okay? You are already running a business whether you like it or not. But also, in order to increase the impact of your science and the contribution that you do to society, it may really help you just to learn a little bit about innovation, okay? Because as already mentioned, innovation and R&D, they are rather different things. Now, why it is that innovation it is different from R&D? Let me share with you a couple of examples. Even though I am way too old already to have a console game, I know that Nintendo, and probably many of you, which are a lot younger than myself, are aware of it as well. Nintendo has been very successful developing console games for people. Even though, in relative terms, Nintendo is a very small company, and it is competing with massive companies such as Sony developing the PlayStation, and an even bigger company, a more successful Microsoft, developing the Xbox. Well, let me share with you a little story. Actually, this is a wonderful example where David is beating Goliath, not just once, but actually twice. This graph, it shows the sales of game consoles globally, okay? And what's quite remarkable is this, that even though Nintendo is a smaller company that Microsoft and Sony, it is the winner in the market. It actually had the main market share in this particular market. And what's even more relevant, it is that unlike Sony and Microsoft, the console that Nintendo develops, the Wii and most currently the Switch, actually they are based on a very limited R&D budget. And by and large, that technology, it is off the shelf. So it is already available. So in other words, this is a wonderful example where a small organization with a very limited R&D budget, it is being quite successful at innovation, okay? Even though it is competing with companies much bigger, with much deeper R&D budgets. And actually, if we take a look at the global level, this is the relationship existing between the most innovative companies and their R&D intensity. In other words, their R&D budget. As you can see, there is no such thing as a meaningful relationship. So some companies, they spend a huge budget on R&D, and they are not equally successful at innovation, but the opposite is also true. So in other words, you can be to be successful in innovation is not only about having a huge budget, that always helps, but at the end of the day, it is about knowing how to actually implement innovation in any organization. Let's move into another example at the most aggregate level. This is a graph showing the most innovative economies globally. It is updated to only to the year 2019 because last year it was a bit of an outlier. And you can see that the number one, it is South Korea. Then we have other very successful countries like Israel, Finland, Switzerland, Germany, the second one, and so on. But again, we learned already that within the domain of companies, there is not really any relationship between the amount of the budget that in R&D that you have and how successful you are at innovation. In other words, just having a wonderful R&D budget is not a good predictor of your success in innovation. And we need to be aware of that, okay? Now, when we have a look at the same graph, but in this case, comparing not companies, but rather countries, you see that essentially the same picture is unfolding. Some countries with much more limited R&D budget, they are much more effective at taking that R&D effort into the market and making an impact on the society. So I believe that these are important take-home message for all of us. That again, even though having a big R&D budget is always nice and welcome, but it's not a good predictor at how successful your innovation efforts are going to be. Innovation is a different thing, okay? Now, also, some people wonder whether innovation is only appropriate for profit-seeking organizations, in other words, companies looking for a profit. I strongly believe that's not the case, okay? Actually, I am passionate about the fact that the need for innovation it is equally relevant for a profit-seeking organization than for a non-for-profit. Okay, why? Because based on the basic concept that we discussed already, not-profit organizations, that could be an NGO, that could be a university, that could be a small organization. They might not pursue profits, but still they run a business. and not all of them are aware of it. And actually, there are some wonderful examples about organization driving very successful innovation efforts. One that I really admire is what the World Food Program, which is one of the UN agencies, is doing on innovation, where they have been really being able just to bring the power of innovation in order to deliver more food to some of the people needing it the most. So again, this is a wonderful example about innovation. It creates value in a non-profit organization. Okay, but there are more examples as well. I mean, governments only exist to serve the people and improve their well-being and all, right? At least on paper, that's the only reason why governments exist. But again, from my perspective, there is a very compelling reason why governments, they really need to embrace innovations. Let me just give you one example. An idea about what's the US government expenditure all of the whole country GDP? In other words, for every dollar used in the US, how many dollars are actually managed by US government? Actually, that figure is massive. It's 35%. In other words, Uncle Sam, he manages almost, not almost, more than $1 per every dollar used in the US. In other words, and using the US only as an example, governments, in my view, they have a moral obligation to be very successful at innovation because they have a huge leveraging power. They can really make the difference. I mean, on the citizens of those countries, simply because they manage such a large fraction of the overall budget. So in my view, and even though, yes, there are some efforts here and there, but usually not on a systematic way, I believe that governments, they must excel at innovation and they need to do it properly. Okay, but also universities. Universities, what's the business of university? It is to prepare today's brightest minds just to thrive tomorrow. And one wonderful example of innovation from this perspective, it is actually this conversation that we're having at the moment, which is being organized and led by NCSU. Because by doing this, we are creating value that otherwise it wasn't being created. So NCSU is actually practicing innovation. At the end of the day, innovation is about delivering value to customers / user beneficiaries and doing it in a meaningful way. Now, from my own perspective, and this is my bias, I believe that the ultimate goal of innovation, not only in a non-profit organization, also in industry, working in a company, is having an impact at the society level, is to improve the well-being and the outlook of society as a whole. That's the main driver, and that's why I'm so passionate about innovation. You may have other goals, but that's mine. Now, another wonderful example, and this is quite relevant to plant breeding, it is what Excellence in Breeding is doing. Excellence in Breeding is a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation investment on CIMMYT, where it is focused just to really upgrade and improve breeding in every single CGR center. CGR centers are those centers like CIP, like CIMMYT, like ERI, like CIAT and many others that are as part of this global CGR organization. And breeder is one of the core activities that we do. I have the privilege to serve in a couple of roles within Excellence in Breeding, and I encourage you, when you have a minute, have a look at what Excellence in Breeding is doing. There is a lot of information about it. And what I'm very excited about, the mindset that we're bringing about with Excellence in Breeding, is that we're not only about technology upgrade and more funding. I mean, that's part of the equation. But at the end of the day, we're going well beyond that. It's about learning how to deal with management. So it's about change management as well, because simply more technology tools and more breeding budgets I don't believe that they will be enough just to improve the outcome of CGR breeding programs. It's about bringing in an innovation mindset and particularly the ability to change management. Okay, now let's move into the concept of the job to be done. Scientists, we don't always pay enough attention to our customer needs, and business people either. And in many cases, we don't even know who our customer is. In some cases, there is reluctance to sell our work, okay? And I believe that in order to address these 3 points, we really must become much more customer-driven, no matter where you're working in a company or in a university. We need to become much more customer-driven. But being customer-driven is a bit meaningless. It doesn't say a lot by itself. So let's deep a little bit on that. Well, for starters, we have many, many customers. And even a breeder working in an academic organization, it has many customers. For starters, farmers, students, postdocs, funding agencies, farmers, other scientists, policymakers, and at the end of the day, taxpayers. Because the grant that you might be running on, it is coming from taxpayers' money. And I believe that this concept, the job to be done, is a really wonderful way to really understand what being a customer-driven is all about. So let me share with you this very brief video. Please, Carlos Branson, please confirm me that you're able to—
Hi, my name is Clay Christensen. I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School.
Okay, great.
I brought with me a set of puzzles, all related to innovation. We decided that the way we teach marketing is at the core of what makes motivation difficult to achieve. The most helpful way we've thought of it so far is that we actually hire products to do things for us. And understanding what job we have to do in our lives for which we would hire a product is really the key to cracking this problem of motivating customers to buy what we're offering. So I wanted just to tell you a story about a project we did for one of the big fast food restaurants. They were trying to goose up the sales of their milkshakes. They had just studied this problem up the gazoo. They brought in customers who fit the profile of the quintessential milkshake consumer. And they'd give them samples and ask, could you tell us how we can improve our milkshakes so you'd buy more of them? Do you want it chocolatey or cheaper, chunky or chewier? They get very clear feedback. They would then improve the milkshake on those dimensions, and it had no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So one of our colleagues went in with a different question on his mind, and that was, I wonder what job arises in people's lives that cause them to come to this restaurant to hire a milkshake. So we stood in a restaurant for 18 hours one day and just took very careful data. What time did they buy these milkshakes? What were they wearing? Were they alone? Did they buy other food with it? Did they eat it in the restaurant or drive off with it? It turned out that nearly half of the milkshakes were sold before 8 o'clock in the morning. The people who bought them were always alone. It was the only thing they bought, and they all got in the car and drove off with it. So to figure out what job they were trying to hire it to do, we came back the next day and stood outside the restaurant so we could confront these folks as they left, milkshake in hand. And in language that they could understand, we essentially asked, excuse me, please, but I got to sort this puzzle out. What job were you trying to do for yourself that caused you to come here and hire that milkshake? And they'd struggle to answer, so we'd then help them by asking other questions like, well, think about the last time you were in the same situation, needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake. What did you hire? And then as we put all of their answers together, it became clear that they all had the same job to do in the morning, and that is they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to do while they drove to keep the commute interesting. One hand had to be on the wheel, but somebody had given them another hand and there wasn't anything in it. And they just needed something to do while they drove. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock. So they also wanted something that would just pull down there and stay for their morning. Good question. What do I hire when I do this job? You know, I've never framed the question that way before, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job. Take my word for it, never hire bananas. They're gone in 3 minutes, you're hungry by 7:30. If you promise not to tell my wife, I probably hire donuts twice a week, but they don't do it well either. They're gone fast, they crumb all over my clothes, they get my fingers gooey. Sometimes I hire bagels, but as you know, they're so dry and tasteless. Then I have to steer the car with my knees while I'm putting jam on them, and then if the phone rings, we got a crisis. I remember I hired a Snickers bar once, but I felt so guilty I've never hired Snickers again. Let me tell you, when I come here and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it easily takes me 20 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. Who cares what the ingredients are? I don't. All I know is I'm full all morning and it fits right here in my cup holder. Well, it turns out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors, which in the customer's minds are not Burger King milkshakes, but it's bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, coffee, and so on. But I hope you can see how, if you understand the job, how to improve the product becomes just obvious.
Can you see my presentation and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Both.
Thank you. So I really like the concept of the job to be done.
Good afternoon.
And it drives a lot of.
That's pretty good. Good afternoon.
You probably need
All right,
to.
there we go. I have good news and bad news. I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is if you just arrived at the summit,
Is your computer, Hugo?
incredible speakers,
Your website?
conversations about what's happening across our nation today. If you didn't just arrive, the bad news is you've had lunch, probably a snack.
Can you
It's
go to your web,
You're feeling it.
and cancel?
The really good news is I get to introduce our next speaker.
Kill that.
And I can say personally,
Okay, there you are.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I really like the concept of the job to be done, and that's why I'm sharing it with you, because it has really changed the way I think about innovation. I'm always looking to understand the job to be done of my customer. In my case, it may be a very small farmer in Uganda, in Nigeria, in Vietnam, but regardless, he has or she has a job to be done. And unless I understand very clearly what is the job that he or she is trying to do, I won't be able to address it and to serve her needs. So now, let me go back to my presentation. Now, the company that this short video was referring to, it was McDonald's. But actually, the milkshake, the sale of milkshakes, they didn't increase 70%. Do you know? Do you really want to know how much they grew? 700%, because McDonald's understood what was the job to be done behind people getting a milkshake. In other words, really, I mean, every single innovation effort that I'm aware of to deliver value, it really starts from the very starting point, really understanding who your customer is. And even more relevant, what's the job to be done that her or she is trying to fix, okay? And this is a little story that very nicely shows that. Now, the customer to be done has three components. A, the functional, what it is that it does. The functional job, it addresses practical and technical aspects. It has a social one. It addresses behavioral aspects of users. It's about people or group of people. And it is emotional. It's about very deep personal aspect of users, such as feelings, aspiration, desires. Now, what do you think that in most cases is the out of those three jobs, where it is that the most effort is going into? In other words, which is considered to be the most relevant one? The functional, the social, or the emotional one? Please write on the chat your views, so that we all learn from all of us. So in other words, what is in most innovation efforts and in most R&D, it is the functional, the social, or the emotional one. Yeah. Yes, actually, we have several answers. What I can tell you, though, it is that by and large, most of the effort goes into the functional one. And this explains why so many innovation efforts fail, even in industry. Over 80% of the products going into retail every year, they fail. Because by and large, most of the effort and most of the dollars, they go into addressing the functional ones. Whereas the main drivers of value creation, it is actually the social and emotional ones. Okay, and even though this is just my own view, I believe that we human beings, we are like a huge Pacific Ocean full of feelings and emotions. Okay, and we only have a very tiny island where we're rational. We may be aware of that or not. We may like it or not, but I believe that the main driver of human beings are not, they're not technical, they're not rational. We are not rational creatures. It is our ego that led us to believe that we're rational creatures. We're anything but rational creatures. And therefore, when you are designing innovation efforts, even in R&D, you need to be aware of that. That yes, the functional component is important, but in many cases, the actual drivers of value are on the social or in the emotional domain. Let me give you one example. Why there is one brand of headphones which is it started as a startup, much smaller than huge companies like Bose or GBL, are hugely successful in the US because they really understand the concept of the job to be done. And they put a lot of effort on the social and emotional drivers of value rather than in the functional one. You see? Because kids, they want this. So kids or teenagers, they are not really after the most wonderful sound experience. They want to be cool in high school. Okay, so again, you may argue that this example has nothing to do with plant breeding. You are correct. However, this example is about human beings, and let's never forget our customers, our farmers. They are human beings as well. So only bringing technology to them is not enough. A second example, much closer to plant breeding. This comes from India. In India, some very talented breeders, they developed some outstanding drought-tolerant rice varieties in Bihar. They, their performance on the drought, it was about 35% better than the previous one. Was that a success? What about the adoption rate of those varieties? It fell short of expectation badly. Why? Because the focus, it was only on the functional component, the variety, without understanding the drivers for decision-making among small farmers, which by and large are around loss aversion and peer pressure. Okay, again, just learning from the Beat headphones, we need to seek a balance. I'm not saying for every single R&D or innovation effort, most of the focus has to go into the social and the emotional components. I'm not saying that. We need to strike the right balance, and that depends on different situations. Another example, again, from breeding. In this case, is from Uganda, where Ugandan farmers, they are not willing to take new improved rice varieties, which are much more productive than the previous one, even though the reduction in utility of losing $1 equals the utility of gaining $2. In other words, what's at stake here, it has nothing to do with the actual variety. It has to do with what's called loss aversion. All of us human beings were very hardwired around loss aversion, and sometimes instead of the possibility of gaining 2, we decide not to lose 1. And in many cases, this is a huge driver of adoption of varieties. Again, it's slightly different from the balance among the functional, emotional, and social jobs that the big headphones company was able to achieve. Now, what about the power of failure? This is a fact. By and large, globally, in every single country, about 80% of startups, they fail, they go down during the first year. And over 90%, they fail during the second year. Over 80% of new commercial retail launches, they fail, okay? They fail miserably. So failure is a fact of life. And in the most positive way, I want you to fail. Let me elaborate why. I mean, I define failure as the experience that precedes success, okay? And it is from this perspective that I want you to fail, because at the end of the day, I want all of you to be hugely successful, whether you're working for a company or for a non-profit organization, okay? Now, I'm not endorsing negligence, sloppy work, nor not being careless, okay? Instead, what I'm trying to share with you, it is the concept of clever failure. What clever failure is all about? It's about failing often, okay? As frequently as you can, but very cheaply and as early as possible in the innovation process. And I believe that in many cases, our R&D efforts, they will become much more successful and with a much higher impact if we learn how to how to fail in a clever way. And this is just one little example about that. So the main reason why, or one of the main reasons why several colleagues at CIP and actually from NCUSU as well as Professor Cregencio decided to publish this, is because we found that the rate of mislabeling sweet potato clones, it was unacceptable. That was a failure. What's the point on achieving genetic gain if you have a very high rate of misidentified clones in your breeding programs? Okay, so that's a failure. So we look for the reason, we fix it, and we share it so that other people could learn from our failure. Now, please read this quote. I will give you just a tip. So this quote is what it comes from a basketball player. Now, again, please write on the chat whether you think that the person who wrote this quote, it was a very poor player, an average one, or an outstanding one. What do you think? Go ahead and share your experience on the chat, please. Again, the question is this quote coming from a poor, from an average, or from an outstanding basketball player? It is about failure, okay? It could be from a loser. Well, let me tell you something. Michael Jordan, according to many people, is the best ever basketball player. And by and large, he became so successful because he learned from clever failure. And he learned that failure is the experience that precedes success. Let's not forget about this. Now, I believe that, wrapping up, I believe that scientists in breeding and in other domains of research can gain a lot from acquiring an innovation mindset. Again, innovation is very different from R&D. And to achieve impact, again, whether you are in a company or working on an NGO, on a non-profit organization, or in a university, just to really achieve impact and to touch human lives. Again, this is my own call. I really want to touch human lives in a positive way through my work. You will really benefit from understanding the job to be done of your customers and to design R&D aimed to address such a job to be done. Finally, again, just a reminder, I really encourage you to read Matt Riley's book. It is really a wonderful book. And you're more than welcome to download by free the Innovation Revolution in Agriculture book. That's the link. I will write it down also on the chat. Thank you very much, Carlo. Back to you.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you so
And
much.
I deliver on 40 minutes as expected. Thank you.
Yes, very, very timely. And thank you for your talk. It's a pleasure to have you as a partner with us at NC State in the Sweet Game projects, and not only a partner, but a friend of NC State. Please post your questions in the Q&A. We're also checking the chat in case you post the questions there. I do have a comment here, an observation, which maybe Hugo, you can regard this. Stephen Smith, I think it is, said that acceptance of GMOs is definitely highly linked to emotional and social aspects of innovation. And can you react on what do we need to change to change that, particularly in societies other than United States, particularly in Europe and other societies?
Yes, thanks, Stephen, for your thoughtful question. I mean, let me start with a disclaimer. During a lot of my career in industry, I developed GMOs, and I'm strongly supportive of the technology, okay? But I believe that, I mean, when we, as an industry or as a scientist globally, when we deliver GMOs to the world, we focus too much the story about its technology advantages, which are real. However, farmers, and more importantly, the other customers down the supply chain, they are much more interested in driving the decision-making process from a social and from an emotional perspective. But when you do that, I think that you can really have an impact. Allow me to share a very little story that I was part of. While with Monsanto, part of my work, it was to develop the first wave of GMO products to market in Paraguay, a small country in Latin America, next to Brazil and next to Argentina. And actually, we did it from a completely different perspective. And it was a wonderful example of innovation put to practice, and I feel proud to have led the effort with many other colleagues. Instead of talking to people around an agronomic perspective, we start telling them, listen, if GMOs are allowed in Paraguay under a proper regulatory framework, that will represent, from a tax perspective, about 50% of the budget of your Ministry of Education. And when we start to frame the narrative from that perspective, everything changes, okay? It was the same technical value proposition. There were transgenic crops, okay? There was a huge opposition, but we positioned the narrative not only from the farmer, okay? From the less pesticides and all of that, okay? Or using a more environmentally friendly herbicide. We took the narrative in a completely different perspective, that even though that technical part is true, we really appeal to the social and to the emotional gain that the whole country, it will come from GMO. Fast forward, just to make a long story short, we succeed, and we were able just to bring biotech products into the country, actually not only in corn, also in soybean and in cotton. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hugo. Ashrat from IITA is asking how the milkshake experience applied to crop breeding, particularly when you breed for subsistence farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, for example.
Can you repeat the question, please?
How the milkshake experience applies to situations like breeding for subsistence farmers?
Okay, based on my experience, it applies neatly. It's not about the milkshake, it's about the job to be done. The milkshake is a very successful example to tell the world about the job to be done. Okay, now, what is the job to be done that small farmer that he's breeding for trying to do, or her? In many cases, particularly in Africa, it is women who do a lot of the farming. So instead of thinking, okay, what is that my donor want me to do, or what my boss want me to do, what it is the job to be done, what's the progress in her or his life that that person is trying to achieve. It is only more productivity. What about having a product which it is a lot easier and simpler to be multiplied, okay? Or what about, listen, what I'm gonna say, it must sound almost silly, but it is critical. In many countries in Africa, it doesn't really matter if you develop the best sweet potato variety in the world. If that variety, it takes longer to be cooked, it won't take off, simply because cooking in Africa is not trivial. You need to, in many cases, you know, to work for hours just to get the good and all of that. So what I'm saying is that the job to be done, based on my own experience and in others, it really drives the real job just to achieve impact and more success. If you understand that the adoption, because at the end of the day, a breeder, it doesn't only want to release a variety. Breeders, they want to achieve a high adoption rate with those varieties. And you need to understand that to achieve such a high adoption rate, the variety is critical, but you also need to understand what other bits will make your customer to actually not only adopt that variety, to tell their neighbors about it. Thank you.
Okay, Basilia Fasula asks, how would you define innovation in a few words?
How do I define innovation?
Innovation.
Okay, in a very simple yet deceptive way. To me, innovation, it has nothing to do with those fancy bigger than life definitions that are all over the place. To me, innovation is positive change. Okay. Now, if I could add just a little appendix, to me, innovation is about creating value for someone. Now, that someone, it could be a customer, an end user, or a beneficiary, but at the end of the day, it's about creating value. And it's about bringing positive change to impact. The only point that I would take the liberty to stress is this one. If you are in the business of innovation, if you are not able to get adoption of that, you are failing. Okay, so to me, innovation is very closely tied to achieving high adoption rates. Thank you.
Okay. I think you somehow answer this, a question from Larissa: how do you assure to attend social and emotional demands from farmers for breeding programs? I would probably ask you to refer, what are the tools that we have for that? Because in the case of McDonald's, it was relatively easy to do that. I mean, you go to restaurants and survey customers and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, let me give you a real life example. How many talented breeders in Africa, they have spent one full day with their customer, understanding the pain that it is getting the meal cooked for your family. You see, so in other words, actually, in different professional lives, I have put to use the job to be done concept with much less budget than McDonald's, and with a very successful impact and outcome. It's about embracing the perspective of the customer. You see, unless you do that, you may not be successful. So, I mean, this is just a suggestion, but I believe that every single breeder, many do, but not everyone, they must spend time with their customer, with the farmers, not just trying to push their products, understanding their pain. In Africa, spending one whole day with a woman, trying to somehow fix a meal for her family. If you are working in a developed country, let's say in Europe or in the US, how many, I'm asking this question because I've done it, but how many breeders have spent one full day sweating like crazy in a combine harvesting corn? You see, that's part of the picture. So again, we don't need a huge budget to implement the job to be done, and I will be more than delighted just to share my experience with people interested to embrace it.
Thank you, Hugo. Simon here is asking about crops that have existed for thousands of years and have never come up to gain popularity, I would say, innovation. But how there seems to be a way to for new crops to emerge, how are scientists enhance the timeliness of those crops, new crops, I mean, minor crops or specialty crops?
Okay, well, again, this is my own view. I could be mistaken. Actually, many of my friends know what I'm going to say. I love to be proven wrong. It's the only way for me to get better. Okay, so I believe that that part of the job is not up to scientists. Not many scientists are able to tell a compelling narrative. And by the way, this is a suggestion for NCSU. We cannot afford to do that. Every single scientist that I can claim as a successful, not only in industry, in academia as well, by and large is a wonderful salesman or saleswoman. You need to learn how to sell your story, how to prepare a narrative, and not only to the dean, to your colleagues, to the donor. Okay, so to me, the first part of the job is not up to the scientist unless he or she is very good to tell a narrative. And actually, in my own case, I have to learn a lot and making huge mistakes before I became a good storyteller. But I believe storytelling is a critical trait in a toolbox of any successful scientist. And by the way, this is kind of funny, but we learn from failure. To some extent, my presentation was a failure because I forgot my final slide. That's the one. Okay, I know that we have people from many countries, so I just want to thank you for the time and have joking right on the last line. That's not a mistake. That's thank you in binary code. That's the word that we're giving it. And finally, that's my email. Again, feel free to reach out to me or to follow me on LinkedIn. So
we have a couple more questions. Here we go. Ramsey here at UNC is saying that a lot of the deployed technologies by private industry have been generated by actually public institutions that have a much lower research budget than the private companies. And he's asking, why might you believe this is to be the case?
Why what? It could be the case.
Why do you believe is the case that a lot of the technology is developed by public institutions with smaller budgets and still taken by private companies and deployed?
Okay, so listen, I mean, it would take me 2 hours to address that. Just let me give you a very short answer. I mean, I believe that, to some extent, that's not bad because since I come from an industry, I know that in many cases, it is only companies able to scale up an R&D development or invention up to a very large number of people, okay? So that's not bad in itself. However, I believe to some extent that happens because we as scientists, we have not been able to tell a story, to sell our work. I mean, the reality is that many papers, they are not read by more than 40 to 50 people. You see, so, and it's fine. We have been hardwired that the outcome of science is either a paper or a patent. I respectfully disagree. I believe that reaching out to society is critical. And in many cases, you will learn from that. And not only that, you will achieve much more impact as a scientist.
Yeah, and so I think Ramsey's probably answer to Ramsey's question is the power of innovation that sometimes we have at public institutions working with smaller budgets. There's a power of innovation there, and that's what is picked by private companies too.
Yes, of course, and by the way, I believe that gene editing and predicting breeding, it provides a unique opportunity for many scientists doing fantastic work in industry and academia just to fix that.
Mm-hmm. As long as they are connecting, as long as we understand what they're going to hire those technologies for what kind of job, as you said before.
Exactly, but regardless, I mean, again, this is my own view. I could be mistaken. I believe that, I mean, the more a scientist engaged in reaching out, the more impact he or she will have.
The final question I have is from Asra in IITA, and he's wondering what stage of a breeding program do you think is best to fail, given the long cycle that we usually face with
Okay, so that's a wonderful question. I mean, for me, the first one, and again here, academia and industry and university might play a critical role. To me, the first place where I want to fail very quickly is in silico. In other words, using predicting breathing, predicting performance before even touching the ground. Okay, modeling 2 million breathing strategies and coming up only with 2 or 3 that I may deploy in the farm. I mean, I know that I'm changing the mindset, but this is what innovation is all about. So first, we need to fail on the in silico world because it's a lot cheaper. Okay.
I see. Okay.
Now, then I believe that the sooner we fail on the very early stage of a breathing program, the better. And here I've seen many talented breathers to make the same mistake all over again. Please don't. They fall in love with the breathing line and they take it forward no matter what.
Okay, yeah. Can I ask you the favor to stop sharing, Hugo, so I can share my screen, please?
Of course. Okay, done.
All right, thank you. So thank you so much, Hugo, for a wonderful presentation. For sure, I think you're going to have quite a few people contacting you. Maybe you regret offering your email and contact information at some point. But
no, that's fine because I gave a fake one. That's okay.
Okay. The recordings for this seminar will be available in our website, and you're going to receive a message with the link to those recordings. I got to give credit for the music today. It's by a Brazilian musician, Quincas Moreira, and it's a Latin American song. Please, I want to ask from the audience, if you want to share some music in MP3 format, we can play it. And photos also. I want to enlarge the library of photos that I have to open up this event. And again, thank you for the people that has helped us put together this seminar, Brandon, Janine, Anthony, and I will invite you for next Thursday at this same time. We're going to have Jorge Carlos Berni Teran from the World Coffee Research talking about coffee breathing from a global perspective. I think it's going to be exciting to learn about the work that is being done globally for coffee. So I would invite you to join us. We're going to set a reminder earlier on this week and the day of the seminar. Thank you so much, Hugo. Again, it's a pleasure to have you. Yes.
May I have a little ask? I mean,
please.
The Innovation Revolution book is open access. So would it be okay if you share the link when you send that email to everybody?
Yeah, we will send it. Yes, when we send the recording email, Brandon, please let's share the link, okay, for the book. Thank you so much, everybody, and thanks for joining. Okay, thanks. We have people from all over the world, so great. Thank you, Hugo. Very good. Okay.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Hasta luego. Un abrazo. Take care.
Bye. Ciao. Ciao.